In 1987, sports fans around the world awoke to extraordinary news. Boxing superstar Sugar Ray Leonard had come out of retirement to face off against the unstoppable Southpaw champion, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. For nearly a decade, this had been the one fight that many fans had hoped for the most. But as the years ticked by, it became more and more apparent that it was the one fight they would probably never see. That all changed on the night that Hagler fought formidable contender John Mugabe. Although Mugabe had stopped 25 of his 25 opponents via KO or corner stoppage, pretty much everyone still expected Hagler to steamroll over him. After all, Hagler had proven equally dominant in beating 11 strong challengers over his 6 years holding the middleweight belt, knocking out every single opponent but Roberto Duran. But on the night of the fight, Mugabe surprised everyone by giving Hagler trouble, staying at range and outboxing the Southpaw. Equally surprised was Sugar Ray Leonard. Watching the back and forth fight intently from his front row seats, Leonard had a crazy idea creep into his head. If the knockout artist Mugabe was giving Hagler trouble by outboxing him, then how much trouble could the great boxer Sugar Ray Leonard give him? Leonard turned to the man he was seated next to, who happened to be the movie star Michael J. Fox, and proclaimed that he was certain he could beat Hagler. "Sure you can," said Michael. "Have another beer." But Ray was dead serious. He had gotten the sense that Hagler had weakened, and now he was determined to test his lightning-fast hands against Hagler's granite chin. Leonard was thrilled when Hagler finally took Mugabe out in the 11th. If anyone was going to defeat Marvin Hagler, he decided, it was going to be him. It would be a tough stylistic matchup for both men, each having a unique, unusual style, and each being strong where the other was weak. Hagler was a southpaw switch hitter with knockout power in both hands. The foundation of his style was an incredibly unique jab, thrown off of a shuffle. Gazelle hooks are rare enough, but Hagler's Gazelle jab was even more powerful, as he could use it to move competitors into his left hand. This is where Hagler's fluid ability to switch stances really came in. After compelling opponents to move inside with his right, Hagler would cut off the ring and rapidly close distance by turn shifting into orthodox. Hagler was known for being a complete savage in the ring, isolating himself for weeks before the fight to focus purely on the hatred he held for his opponents, what he called feeding the monster that lived inside of him. He was able to finally unchain this monster on the night of his fights. It would be hard to think of a boxer more different in every way from Hagler than Sugar Ray Leonard. Leonard's style was inspired by Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. He could evade shots by rebounding back and forth in a wide stance, or cross-step around the ring to set up jabs like Ali. He could also seamlessly transition between the two whenever he felt like. His hand speed was unmatched. Opponents were hit by Leonard's second punch before they realized the first punch had landed. While he was a boxer at heart, he could turn into a puncher if he needed to, as he had against Thomas Hearns. But Sugar Ray preferred finesse, making opponents miss with deft head movement and setting them up with rhythm manipulation. Ray was so great at feinting that he could land flagrantly telegraphed shots off of foot feints alone. Leonard was equivalent to Hagler in one way, and that was brutality. Leonard's charming attitude and big smile made people forget his true nature while inside the ring. Leonard himself would eagerly tell anyone who would listen just how much he loved putting his opponents on the canvas. Hagler had hounded Ray for a fight for years. His relentless pursuit based as much on resentment of Leonard's quick climb to wealth and fame as much as boosting his own personal legacy. It had taken 45 fights for Hagler to win a title, and longer still to gain popularity. While Leonard's Olympic gold meant he was well known even before his first professional bout. Leonard made $40,000 for his first fight. Hagler made $50. Hagler felt that Ray had been given everything, stealing Ali's style and coach, and taking Sugar Ray Robinson's name. In short, he felt that Leonard was a manufactured phony, and had always been intent on proving it. After months of intense training, the night finally arrived. Even now, Ray was still not sure what he'd gotten himself into. The first round would let him know, in no uncertain terms, if he had made a huge mistake. Hagler, on the other hand, beamed confidence. He had given Ray everything he could ask for, from a large ring to a shortened 12-round championship fight. The only request Hagler's team had made was to switch out one of the judges, concerned that an English judge may still hold animosity towards Hagler for his defeat of a popular British boxer. But now it was his time. Time to prove to the world who the real superstar should have been all along. The bell rang, and Leonard rushed to the center of the ring. Leonard happened to know that Hagler liked to claim center ring at the beginning of each round. He knew this because he had planted a spy in his camp to watch him spar. This would be the first of many similar tactics that Leonard hoped would destroy Hagler's composure. But Hagler was looking to do the same, coming out as an orthodox fighter with his left foot forward rather than his usual southpaw stance. It had been 3 years since Leonard had been in the ring, and Hagler now hoped to exacerbate his ring rust by giving him a look he had not prepared for. But although Hagler's strategy had some decent logic behind it, it backfired tremendously. Ray jabbed and danced like the Leonard of old, dominating the round. Leonard had been terrified before the bell rang, but now he gained more confidence with each jab landed, and every punch evaded. This would have been far more difficult with Hagler's right foot forward, as was evident when Hagler finally switched to southpaw near the end of the round. In southpaw, Hagler's shoulder was in the way of Leonard's jab, and his new lead foot made it difficult for Leonard to move to his left. The bell rang out just as Leonard was throwing out a hard hook, and Ray stopped himself mid-punch, smiling at Hagler's over-enthusiastic defense. Man, he's scared too, thought Leonard. Ray returned to his corner more certain than ever that he still belonged in the ring. Both men had tried to break the other's composure, but only Hagler had weakened himself in doing so. In round 2, Hagler came out left foot forward once again, and now that Leonard had cleared off the cobwebs, he felt it was time to throw more than just jabs. The second was an important round, as it established 2 key battlegrounds upon which the middleweight war was to be waged. The first was Leonard's use of broken rhythm. Leonard circled and danced as he had in the first, but now he would suddenly stop short, breaking his rhythm to plant down and throw. Then he would angle off once again. What Leonard was doing was setting up a consistent rhythm for Hagler to follow, and then breaking it to let Hagler walk himself into Leonard's shots. Leonard's coach, the great Angelo Dundee, had noticed from watching tapes of Hagler that he liked to set up his punches with a certain rhythm, calling Hagler a two-stepper, someone who liked to hop in with a 1 and a 2 cadence before throwing a punch. And once thrown off his rhythm, he noted, he would be a sucker for a right-hand counter. And so, Leonard intended to get off his punch in the time it took Hagler to prepare his. But Hagler was a far better boxer than most gave him credit for. While Leonard surprised Hagler the first time, catching him clean with a rare body hook, the second time, Hagler ducked under Leonard's overhand and then threw a hard body shot. The next time Leonard stopped short to throw, Hagler elbow blocked and shot out a rear hook. But this time, Leonard successfully evaded, throwing back a straight right to counter Hagler's counter, which Hagler also evaded. This had all happened in under a second. These high-level counters and counter-counters would be a staple throughout the remainder of the fight, both men pitting their boxing knowledge and intelligence earned from years of experience against the other. The second major battleground would be at close range, as Leonard attempted to clinch whenever Hagler came close to cornering him. For this, Dundee had taught Leonard a tactic from one of his former fighters, Muhammad Ali. Leonard looked to grab Hagler behind his neck and walk him back to the center of the ring. This protected Leonard's head, but came at the expense of exposing his midsection. Hagler's shots in the clinch would have been far more impactful on the judges of yesteryears. However, the shots were money in the bank, damage that could accumulate over rounds and slow Leonard down. Only time would tell if Hagler's body blows would reap the same benefits against Leonard as they had done for Frazier against Ali. Noting that Hagler's change in stance wasn't doing him any favors, his coaches, the Patronelli brothers, begged him to switch to his normal stance, pleading, "Stay southpaw, Marvin. You're a southpaw." Hagler took their advice, storming out with his right foot forward. For many, this was now the actual start of the fight. Immediately, there was a noticeable difference. Hagler could now rely on his signature shuffle jab to close the distance. Ray was having a much harder time driving Hagler into his shots, because Hagler's leaping jab came from so far away that Ray simply wasn't close enough to throw first. What's more, Hagler's jab was putting him in range to score with his left. But while Hagler was doing better at long range, Leonard was figuring out close range. When Hagler and Leonard had both been in orthodox, Leonard used the traditional method of resting on Hagler's left shoulder in order to keep his head safe from Hagler's right hand and smother his left hand. But now that Hagler was in Southpaw, Leonard positioned his head on Hagler's right shoulder and stepped into Southpaw himself. This created the same safe position of two orthodox fighters, only in reverse. Ray was still vulnerable to body blows, but he had hoped to offset this by landing headshots as he exited. But for now, the clinch still favored Hagler. Hagler had done considerably better in the third, but it had also been Leonard's first round adjusting to Hagler's southpaw stance. The fourth would be crucial in determining who would truly control the remainder of the fight. The two stood for the fourth, Hagler banging his gloves against his head, and Ray still intent on stealing center ring. In the third, Hagler had caught Ray with several lefts as he attempted to lateral shuffle away from the ropes. Perhaps in response to this, Leonard stayed more sideways. This put him in a better position to defend and counter, but he was now forced to use more complex footwork to escape. He pivoted 180 degrees and used linear shuffles to exit. But as the round wore on, Hagler was closing the distance more and more consistently. Perhaps sensing the shift in momentum, Ray played to the crowd by winding up a bolo punch. The blow landed low, but it did its job, distracting the audience from Hagler's improving performance. And, just as Ray intended, it infuriated Hagler, who, according to the ref, shouted, "Fight me like a man, bitch." Perhaps Leonard should have been careful what he wished for. Within the space of one round, Hagler had figured a way around Leonard's modified clinch. Hagler went to work creating room for his shots by stepping back into orthodox. Although a bit out of character, Hagler's retreating footwork created the space he needed to sneak in tight uppercuts and hammer Leonard's body. "Everyone was looking for me to knock him out," Hagler would later explain, "but I just wanted to beat him." Ray was often able to counter Hagler's body shots with headshots, evening out the exchanges. Still, Hagler hit harder, and an even exchange would damage Leonard far more over time. If Leonard could not rely on the clinch, he would be far more vulnerable in the corner. Leonard came out for the fifth with a new strategy. With Hagler's jab making it difficult for Leonard to walk him into power shots, Leonard instead looked to keep him at bay with his own jab. Hagler's jab hit much harder, but Ray, a naturally gifted boxer, was having an easier time setting up combinations off of his jab. But then, Hagler once again showed his own boxing acumen. Sneaking into orthodox, he intercepted Leonard's jab by crossing over a huge right, a classic power hand counter from orthodox. Then, Hagler turn shifted into a big left hook. Leonard retorted with a multi-punch combination, but every punch missed its mark. Hagler smelled blood. He pressured Leonard to the ropes repeatedly. Leonard tried to fight fire with fire, throwing a flashy flurry mid-ring that whipped Hagler's head around. But the next time, Hagler punched with him. Sensing danger, Ray tried to clinch. However, Hagler had already found the solution to this in the last round. He stepped back into orthodox to make space and let loose a tremendous uppercut that shook Leonard to his core. With 30 seconds left in the round, Ray would have to do his best to simply survive. But just as he had with Hearns, Leonard stayed totally calm under fire. Falling back on experience, he leaned on the ropes, covered up his body with his arms, and relied on head movement to protect his jaw. Every few seconds, he would barely avoid a knockout punch, then throw a huge flurry that mostly failed to hit anything. Leonard would later say, "When you get hit by Marvin Hagler, his punches are like a thud, like a boom. Just think of a piston constantly pounding. It's the wear and tear that eventually takes control." Thankfully for Leonard, the round ended before Hagler could fully capitalize on his weakened condition. Hagler gave Leonard a small shove. Ray would later admit that he was shocked to realize at that moment that Hagler had no idea how close he had come to taking him out. It had undoubtedly been Hagler's best round in the fight. But while Hagler won the round on all of the judges' scorecards, his clear frustration sent off a signal that he had not done as well as he had. Hagler gave no consideration to the mood of the crowd, or the message that he was sending to the judges. Sugar Ray, on the other hand, was a natural showman, easily able to play to the crowd. This state of affairs would only get worse the longer the fight went on. Then again, if Hagler kept up this momentum, the fight might not last long enough for it to matter. In the corner, Dundee gave Leonard some simple advice, shouting, "Don't stay on the ropes. You're trying to load up. Don't load up." Ray agreed. Hagler, on the other hand, was determined to finish Leonard this round. After a tough start to the fight, he had finally hurt him. However, it was in the 6th that Sugar Ray demonstrated exactly what made him such a great boxer. Leonard put every piece of combat knowledge that he possessed into this one round. He first went to his versatile jab. He used it to break up his rhythm, double or triple jabbing to set up hard crosses and uppercuts in erratic tempos that Hagler could not predict. And because of this element of unpredictability, Leonard could get away with hurling blatant 1-2 combos at Hagler with no setup. He also used his jab to smother Hagler's lead hand, denying him his own jab. Or he left it extended to push Hagler's head or shoulder, off-balancing him. He blocked Hagler's vision. He drew punches so he could counter, or make Hagler miss by slipping or pulling. It was a complete and total masterclass Leonard put on, only one round after nearly being finished. While the 6th only confirmed what Leonard had learned in the 5th, that it was a terrible idea to clinch, Leonard still remained physical, pushing Hagler away or barreling into him. But regardless of how many punches the champion took, Hagler's iron chin meant he could afford to simply take shots until he had Leonard against the ropes. But here too Leonard switched tactics, firing off tight combinations to force Hagler to shell up. Leonard used his brief moment of immobility to pivot away. For the entirety of the round, Hagler came at Leonard with everything that he had. But miraculously, Leonard had pulled himself out of the fire, winning the 6th on the scorecard of all 3 judges. Ray returned to the corner triumphant, but with his clinch gone, he would have to continue relying on his footwork and boxing for the entire second half of the fight. It was anyone's guess just how far the aging boxer's legs could carry him against one of the most aggressive fighters to ever lace up gloves. The 7th and 8th proved what a difficult proposition this would turn out to be. Leonard found he could still clinch for brief moments, incorporating a cross block to avoid uppercuts. Nonetheless, he was still taking far too much punishment at close range to allow him to clinch with any consistency. Hagler was also making it harder and harder for Leonard to counter. Hagler returned to jabbing, but now followed up with mostly body shots. Hagler had realized that it was exceedingly difficult to connect with Leonard's chin, as he could simply lean out of the way. However, he could not do the same with his torso. Hagler's thudding lefts to the body were sapping Leonard's stamina bit by bit. To quote Leonard, "In the 7th, my legs began to go. They had carried me this far, longer perhaps than I had any right to expect. I would now have to rely on my will and intelligence to contend with the fresher Hagler." Leonard tried his hardest to even the score by throwing combinations near the end of the round. In fact, Leonard had told his corner before the fight began to yell out whenever there was 30 seconds left, so that he could leave the judges with the dramatic display just before they marked their scores. "I wasn't really trying to steal rounds," Leonard would later explain. "I was keeping the rounds close and then piling up points near the end." But perhaps Leonard had spent too much energy on flurries. He took hard, damaging shots in the last seconds of the 7th. The few punches he managed to return were thrown after the bell. Leonard didn't do much better in the 8th. Hagler continued punishing Ray's body, and was able to return several counters. The one bright side for Leonard was that Hagler's work rate had slowed significantly. With the pace reduced over the last round, Leonard thought that perhaps Hagler was beginning to fade. But as it turned out, Hagler's slowed work rate in the 8th was just the calm before the storm. Sensing that Ray was wilting, Hagler came out swinging in the ninth, catching Leonard with lefts to the body and to the head. As the round wore on, it became clear that Hagler's relentless bodywork had taken its toll. Midway through the round, Ray found himself trapped against the ropes, with no energy left to escape. Leonard desperately tried to evade Hagler's endless torrent of punches, pulling, weaving, and slipping as best he could. But the longer Leonard languished on the ropes, the more punches got through. "I saw those punches coming," said Ray later, "but there was little I could do about them." Hagler was finally showing the world what he had hoped to prove for years. He had shown himself to be just as intelligent a strategist as Sugar Ray Leonard. He had taken away Leonard's clinch by the fifth, and now he had destroyed his legs in the ninth. For all of Leonard's brilliance, his strategy, his psychological manipulation, and ring finesse, it now came down to this: a dogfight against the meanest dog in the junkyard. Leonard's defenses had failed him. He had been stripped bare, and all that remained was him, Ray Leonard, the man. It was time to find out if that was enough. Too tired to dance, taking punishment in the clinch and against the ropes, he endured Hagler's onslaught until he had regained a small bit of stamina, and then unleashed an insanely complex, lightning-fast flurry. After a torrent of 13 hard punches, something unthinkable happened. Hagler backed up. Leonard used the split-second advantage to escape, but Hagler was right on his heels. Ray danced as far as his legs could take him, then unleashed a 9-punch combination. Leonard's ability to smoothly double up on the same side helped him tremendously, and Ray again broke through Hagler's defense. Hagler responded by barreling into Leonard, slamming 2 hooks into his stomach. Leonard tried another flurry, but Hagler shoved this one off. Ray was only moving through sheer force of will, and his miraculous display of speed could not last forever. Near the end of the round, Leonard was again trapped on the ropes, taking major damage. Even so, it seemed he had done enough to survive. Staring Hagler down face to face at the end of the round. As the two went back to their corners, it was very clear to all that the round had been Hagler's. But Leonard had astonished everyone by fighting back just as it seemed he was finished. What's more, had ended up accidentally proving that he could hurt Marvin Hagler. In Hagler's corner, his coaches informed him that he'd probably lost the first 3 rounds, but he could make up the difference with these last 3 rounds. Besides, Hagler still thought it was very possible to knock Ray out. All he needed to do was prove it. But after the bell rang for the 10th, Leonard continued to build on the small bit of momentum he had earned at the end of the 9th. Hagler, frustrated and hungry for a knockout, once again ignored his jab and failed to set up his power punches. It soon became clear that Hagler had completely spent himself trying to finish Leonard in the 9th, and his punches were not only wide and undisciplined, but dramatically slower. That was the plan, Ray would later explain, to cross his wires, to frustrate him and make him mad. Leonard, meanwhile, continued to put together his own quick-fire combinations. He had taken mental notes of which had worked best over the rounds, including a jab uppercut, slip inside to hard right, and a lead body hook to head hook. Now he put these combinations to good use. Even with all of this, Hagler's relentless pace and insane work rate allowed him to connect with enough punches to put the round in question. In the end, the 10th was nearly even, with 2 of the 3 judges giving the nod to Leonard. Sensing that the crowd had turned against him and never wanted to trust judges regardless, Hagler approached the 11th with incredible ferocity. But this time, he largely abandoned his high guard, keeping his hands lower. He entered into mid-range with skillful head movement, countering with perfect precision and timing. It was Hagler who was flurrying now, leaping across the ring to cover distance, and then brutalizing Leonard on the inside. Ever cognizant of the crowd, Leonard taunted. He milked Hagler's anger for all it was worth. It gives off a certain kind of impression if one fighter looks mad and the other looks scared. It's another kind of impression entirely when one looks mad and the other acts like it's funny. Leonard continued with his sporadic flurries. Hagler was administering punishment at a steady pace, but Leonard was dishing out damage in large, unpredictable doses. Although Hagler was outlanding Leonard, Leonard's hand speed was so off the charts that it was difficult for any casual onlooker to tell how many of his punches were actually landing. All Leonard needed to do was connect once, and fans would assume that every punch in the flurry had landed with the same power and precision. But as great as Leonard looked, he had been running out of fumes since the 9th. Hagler's punches continued to find their mark, and now Ray's chin was being tested as well. Still, Leonard's last-second barrages and showboating were doing their job. Even though Hagler had outlanded Ray in the 11th and thrown the harder punches, it was Leonard's name that the crowd was chanting as both returned to their corners. As the bell rung for the 12th and final round, Leonard raised his hands in the air. The crowd cheered. The message was clear. Leonard was claiming that he had won the fight, that he was so far ahead, all he had to do was survive this last round. To Hagler, it was audaciously delusional, but it was also a little terrifying. Hagler had been at the end of questionable decisions a few times in the past. "I'm a little scared about this fight," he had admitted earlier, because Las Vegas is a gambling town. Hagler now feared that if he didn't finish Leonard off himself, the judges would award Leonard a victory that Hagler thought was clearly his. After waiting over 10 years, he simply could not let that happen. Even more livid than before, Hagler refused to uphold the tradition of touching Leonard's glove for the final round. It was up to the referee to touch the two men's gloves together. Hagler landed a solid left, and Leonard decided it was best to stay at a distance. Even in the last round, Hagler looked fresher than ever, sharp, and dialed in. His guard remained active. He easily waded through Leonard's punches, bullying him into the corner. Once again, Leonard answered with a lightning-fast flurry, and remarkably, he managed to crack Hagler's iron chin one more time. Leonard darted away, Hagler in pursuit. True, he wanted this out of the judge's hands, but this was also personal. It had only become more so after Leonard's behavior during the fight. Leonard circled and danced, showing no indication that he wanted to exchange at all this round. Still, Hagler caught Leonard on the ropes again mid-round. But oddly enough, it was Hagler who chose to disengage, shaking out his weary arms before lunging in again. Leonard stuck his chin out, even now taunting the champion. He raised one arm in victory, used the Ali shuffle, did everything he could to infuriate Hagler, and hide the fact that this was the most tired he'd ever been in his life. Several times, he desperately looked over at his corner to see how much time was left, all while projecting an air of extreme confidence. But finally, his legs were done, and he was forced to clinch and just take the shots Hagler pounded into his midsection. After what seemed to Leonard an eternity, his corner finally yelled out, 30 seconds. Leonard unloaded one final combination, then danced around the ring. 10 seconds later, and his legs had no more to give. The fight was not over, yet all Leonard could do was lean against the ropes and cover up. Leonard would be a sitting duck for the last 20 seconds of the fight. Hagler began by landing two tight uppercuts. Leonard threw back, his weary arms only moving at a fraction of the speed they were capable of. Hagler gave it right back, nailing Leonard with a rear cross to the chin. He stumbled, his legs buckling for a brief moment. Here was Hagler's last best chance at a knockout. Ray threw a wild haymaker, desperately trying to back Hagler off. Hagler pulled, and then came back with two hard straight lefts. But then, suddenly, the bell rang. Leonard was still standing. He raised his hands, ecstatic. Hagler had lost his chance to put Leonard down on the canvas. But still, he was certain that he had won the fight. Leonard smiled. he knew he'd won the fight as well. Very shortly, the two would find out from the judges which was right and which was wrong. After a brief celebration by both fighters, the judges' scores were read. The first judge had it 115 to 113 for Hagler. The second judge had it 118 to 110 for Leonard, a score both fighters found utterly ridiculous. Ironically, the original judge, who Hagler had switched out for this one, was watching from home and would have scored it for Hagler. However, it was now clear there would be a split decision. The last judge held the fate of the fight in his hands. He had scored it 115 to 113 for Sugar Ray Leonard. Leonard had pulled off the impossible, defeating one of the greatest boxers ever a full weight class up. But to this day, the fight remains one of the most controversial bouts in the history of combat sports. I've been asked who I believe won the fight more times than I can count since beginning the Four Kings series. So, I put my opinion in the comments if you're interested, and I'll be sticking around to discuss and debate if you'd like to reply with your thoughts and points. While many feel to this day that Hagler won the fight, perhaps Marvelous Marvin Hagler's greatest achievement came by how he handled the loss. While the other Four Kings continued on well past their time, Hagler simply moved on. Although he still resented Leonard and the boxing world in general, he eventually decided that it was enough that he knew he had won. He turned down a rematch and all the money that came with it and walked into the sunset to become a movie star in Italy. But Leonard was not done yet. He went on to fight Hearns one more time, and you could find that video, along with the iconic bouts of the Four Kings, in the playlist on screen. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.